Hi, this is Brass Check, and we're recording this on February, what is it, 23rd, 2024. And we do a lot of stories, obviously. We are surprisingly the first news organization to break many of the most important stories in the world. And sometimes I think the real story we're telling is just how lame journalism is. And I'm not just talking about mainstream journalism, I'm talking about everything related to journalism, including the so-called alternative press. All right, as we all know, on October 7th, there was a military intrusion by Hamas into southern Israel. The much heralded Israeli military was completely useless, uh, beyond incompetent, that's a story, right? But here's the story that you're not being told, and this is mind-boggling. I've watched hundreds of hours of footage from all sources on this Gaza situation over the last 4 months, and what you're about to see, nobody has talked about it. All right. What was the name of the military operation that Hamas carried out? It was called Al-Aqsa Flood, right? Has anybody questioned or asked why they named it that? Apparently not. We are now going to get into the Al-Aqsa flood.
Let's talk about one of the holiest sites in the world.
This is such a sensitive religious site, isn't it?
One of the flashpoints that led to the 11-day conflict.
Israel's far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has visited the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. And it's a place that you need to get your head around if you want to understand what's going on between the Israelis and Palestinians. Here's the old city in occupied East Jerusalem, the place where Islam, Judaism, and Christianity all intersect. There are several sites here that are holy to all three, including this big compound that rises above everything else. Jews call it the Temple Mount. Muslims call it Al-Haram al-Sharif, which means the noble sanctuary, or the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, or sometimes just Al-Aqsa. Now, right in the middle of everything is the Dome of the Rock. It's an Islamic shrine where Muslims believe the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. And here is the Al-Aqsa Mosque itself. It's got a huge prayer hall with space for 5,000 worshippers.
What you just saw was a documentary made by Al Jazeera a couple of years ago, and it's a useful documentary for sure. But let's look at what she just said so that everybody understands the significance of this. Okay, so the Al-Aqsa compound is made up of two things: a shrine and a pretty large mosque that can hold at least 5,000 people, and it's in Jerusalem. It is considered the third most holy site in Islam. Now, if you consider that the other two holy sites are in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is kind of hard to get into and out of, it is probably the most popular religious site in all of Islam. Okay, let's make sure this is like St. Peter's in Rome. Okay, this is really sacred land to Muslims. And just for a little perspective, we're heading towards 8 billion people on Earth, and we're heading towards 2 billion Muslims. So that means 1 out of every 4 people on this planet is a Muslim. Okay. All right. And this is one of the absolute most sacred pieces of land that they have. And by the way, for all the BS that Jerusalem is the land of Judaism only, this is just utter nonsense. The Romans took over Jerusalem and held it for hundreds and hundreds of years, and then various Muslim groups have controlled it right up until the founding of, not even until the founding of Israel, until this 1967 war. So the historical fraud is mind-boggling, and a lot of rabbis can explain it to you better than I. And we will do a program with some authentic rabbis soon talking about this. But basically, the Al-Aqsa religious compound has been under, obviously it's there, It's been there for century upon century upon century. There was never any debate as to whose religious sanctuary that was. There is a debate now, and we're going to talk about that in this film. And remember, we're asking why the Hamas military incursion was called the Al-Aqsa flood. That's what this film is about, and that's what I'll be talking about. But there's two structures there. One, a mosque. It's sort of a plainish looking building from the outside. It's square and it holds about 5,000 people. But the Golden Dome is a shrine. Now, just again, it's important that you wrap your mind around the sanctity of this building to 1/4 of the world's population. It is, according to their religion, where their prophet, the Prophet Muhammad, ascended to heaven. All right, kind of a big deal. And again, it's a popular place. If you're in Morocco, if you're in Turkey, if you're in Pakistan, even if you're in Indonesia, where there are hundreds of millions of Muslims, it's a lot easier to get to Jerusalem. I mean, now it's a war zone thanks to the Zionist genocide people, but if there weren't such a war going on, it is the easiest place for Muslims to get to. It's a place that Muslims are likely to visit and visit frequently, not just in Palestine, but in the entire world. All right. So I hope I've made it clear how sacred this ground is.
In Christianity, the site matters because of its significance in the Old Testament and because Jesus would have spent time there. And it's also the most holy site in Judaism. It's where 2 ancient Jewish temples once stood. The first was destroyed by the Babylonians. The second stood for almost 600 years until it was destroyed by the Romans in the 1st century. And according to Jewish teachings, the mount is where a 3rd temple should be built when the Messiah, a savior figure, is sent by God.
I want you to pay attention to something that she just said that needs attention. She says that it's the most sacred spot in Judaism. That is debatable, and there are rabbis that would say maybe not. But the most important thing, and this could easily slip by, and if you need to replay this video, by all means replay it, because there's a lot of information here, and I think you understand that you're not getting it anywhere else. She said that in Judaism, that the new temple will be built when the Messiah returns. All right. So believe it or not, in Judaism, they are still waiting for the Messiah. Okay, fair enough. He's clearly not here. But after he returns, then they will rebuild the temple. Okay. There ain't no Messiah around here. All right. Just keep that clear. And it's God himself, according to serious people in Judaism, opposed to the genocidal Zionists, many of whom are atheists. But according to the serious people practicing Judaism, God will let you know he'll be here, or he'll send the Messiah, and it will be obvious. And that's when you start talking about rebuilding the temple. But guess what? Some people want to change the timetable on that. And those people happen to be the genocidal Zionists.
Now, for most of the last 800 years, the compound was controlled by Muslim rulers and wasn't accessible to non-Muslims. Traditionally, Jewish law actually forbids Jews from entering or praying inside the Temple Mount because it's considered so holy, a place of divine presence. So Jews pray outside the compound at the Western Wall, which is thought to have been part of the Second Temple.
Even to this day, the overwhelming majority of Orthodox rabbis will say, you are not allowed to visit. What this means is that throughout the millennia, the Temple Mount for Jews was a focus of devotion, but there were no particular demands pending the coming of the Messiah. All of that changed in 1967.
That's when Israel seized control of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, in the Six-Day War between the Arabs and Israelis. But when it came to Al-Aqsa, the Israelis stuck with an arrangement that kept something called the Waqf in charge. It's an Islamic trust that's run by Jordan.
Jordan would retain control over the actual compound itself, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, its custodianship, its administration, its upkeep, who could access the site, who couldn't access the site, prayer and worship.
And that whole arrangement is wrapped up in this idea known as the status quo. It's a Latin phrase which means the situation as it is now. But in this context, the status quo refers to how things are done at Al-Aqsa.
Very simple. Muslims pray, non-Muslims visit. Full stop.
I hope you heard clearly what he said. Muslims pray there, non-Muslims visit. Okay. Now think about St. Peter's in Rome, or me being an ex-New Yorker, St. Patrick's Cathedral, or any religious place of any kind that's open to the public. So first of all, step one is, according to people seriously practicing Judaism, you're as a Jew, you're not allowed to even enter that property, all right, until the Messiah comes. Okay, that's their religion. Okay, and it's not debatable. All right, of course, the genocidal Zionists have a different opinion, which we're going to see about that in a second, and then we're going to see why Hamas. This is all leading to why Hamas is called its one-day military incursion versus the 120-day now massacre of civilians. Why they called their military incursion Al-Aqsa. Okay, so the guy summed it up beautifully. Muslims go there to pray, non-Muslims go there to visit. Same thing with St. Patrick's Cathedral or St. Peter's in Rome. If you're a Roman Catholic, you go and you participate in the Roman Catholic religion there because it's a Roman Catholic site. Both of those places allow visitors, but as visitors, you're not allowed to go there and conduct Islamic ceremonies or Jewish ceremonies or Buddhist ceremonies or guys, do a search. There was a trans funeral at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Look it up. I'm not even going to go into it. But anyway, you're supposed to conduct Roman Catholic religious rites in the Roman Catholic Church. Other people are welcome as long as they're respectful. Emphasis on the word respectful, right? That's not my theory. That's not the Palestinian theory. That is Judaism, right? They are on board with this. But as we're going to see, the genocidal Zionists are not. They are not only just dismissing a very fundamental tenet of Judaism, which is that you go to visit, you can pray outside, but you can't go inside and pray. It's not allowed until the Messiah comes, right? They're completely disrespecting that. And as you're going to see in a bit, they're saying, well, we're told God's going to send a Messiah, and then we can start thinking about a new temple. Well, obviously God has not sent a new Messiah, and we're going to see what they're attempting to do with Al-Aqsa, which is going to explain why Hamas called their military operation on October 7th Al-Aqsa flood. So let's continue.
That's the theory anyway. What actually happens in practice is another thing.
Change in the Israeli perspective is, we're not your guests. We're your landlord. And we're going to show you that we're your landlord.
So there are lots of ways that the status quo has been violated. Restrictions on Muslim worship, which is something that the Israeli occupation imposes quite frequently. Sometimes age restrictions, usually limiting men of a certain age from entering the site if they feel that there may be protests or something. happening.
We're also seeing more Jewish prayer, whether it's silent, but slowly it's becoming much more overt now.
There is Jewish prayer. I've seen it daily. But beyond that, there is a triumphalism, ultranational triumphalism, which is perceived as a violation of the sanctity of the site by Muslim worshippers and people in the Muslim world.
I hope you caught that. Again, you may need to watch this film more than once because it is packed with information that you are not getting anywhere else. You will not get anywhere else. And you're not getting the analysis anywhere else. So again, I'm going to be a little bit of a broken record here. We're trying to understand why Hamas called its military incursion Al-Aqsa flood. And I think bit by bit, it's starting to be revealed why this is so important. All right. So let's remember, the last Jewish temple was destroyed by the Romans over 2,000 years ago. Okay. And it was under Roman control, I think, for 600 years, long time. And then it became under Muslim control and was from, all the way until 1967. And there's a very important shrine there. There's a very important mosque there. We're talking about 2 billion people who revere this site. Judaism itself says that Jews are not to pray on that site. They have to wait for the Messiah to come. I don't think the Messiah is around yet. And what's happening? Well, the genocidal Zionists, and that's really the only way to describe them. They shouldn't be called Jews. They're certainly not Jews. They shouldn't even be called Israelis, though there are a lot of Israelis that are genocidal Zionists. We really should be calling these people genocidal Zionists because that's what they are. So in recent years, this is very recent, the genocidal Zionists have decided that they're going to violate the tenets of their own religion, or the religion they claim to be part of, and they are going to pray in a place where they're not supposed to pray according to Judaism, right? And they're going to do it in a confrontational way that is highly disrespectful. So again, imagine if a clown circus came into St. Patrick's Cathedral or St. Peter's and decided to chant some kind of mumbo jumbo. And being protected by police, allowing them to do it, and not just being protected by police, but anybody who has a rightful claim that these clowns, because that's really what they are, and it would be funny if hundreds of people weren't being killed on a daily basis as a result of their insanity. But these clowns are being escorted onto this sacred religious site. A most sacred. This is not just any old compound or any old mosque. By the way, this is a sidebar, but we need to say this. How many mosques have the genocidal Zionists destroyed in the last 120 days? Can you imagine if one Muslim defaced one synagogue, which hasn't happened, by the way. That has not happened anywhere. But if that were to happen once, it would be a headline in every single newspaper and news outlet in the universe. And the genocidal Zionists are bombing and utterly destroying mosques every day, and it's barely even news. But in any event, we have the genocidal Zionists intruding on a religious sacred site in violation of their own religion in a confrontational, highly disrespectful way under the protection of Israeli police, who not only are protecting these clowns, they enact violence against the Muslims. And we're going to be seeing this in a second. We haven't even gotten started on this story yet. But if you want to understand why this incursion on October 7th was called Al-Aqsa flood, it's going to get clearer and clearer and clearer. And the wrongness of this whole episode is going to become clearer and clearer. And my question is, I'm sure anybody watching this has watched lots of videos on this subject. I know I've watched in excess of 100 hours. I've had to go in, the documentary that we're showing clips from, that's 2 years old. I haven't seen a contemporary, up-to-date analysis of why this Al-Aqsa site is so important and why it is literally the tinder box, the trigger point for what could be a catastrophic war. And we are talking about full-on World War III. And somehow none of this is making it to the mainstream news media, and none of it is making it to the so-called bullshit alternative media. Yes, bullshit, I call them. I'm sure Muslims are fully aware of this. So we've got 2 billion people on this planet, 1 out of 4, that are aware of exactly what's going on. And we have the rest of the population, thanks to our useless news media, that doesn't have a clue. So let's proceed.
The backdrop to all of this is the growing power of far-right groups and religious hardliners in Israel. For example, there is the Temple Mount movement that's been around for decades. It brings together a range of groups who want to overturn the status quo.
Throughout the years, that fringe became less of a fringe. And during the 1980s and the 1990s began to go mainstream. And today, it is not only not a fringe, it is in power.
Lots of countries condemned it. The UN Security Council called a special session about it. Because there's always the fear of how quickly things can escalate when it comes to Al-Aqsa. Like in the early 2000s, when a visit by the then opposition leader Ariel Sharon triggered the Second Intifada.
So did you hear that? We often hear about these intifadas and we're never told what they're about. They just seem to be spontaneous / crazy uprisings that make no sense. Well, the Second Intifada was triggered by a desecration of Al-Aqsa by Ariel Sharon, a genocidal Zionist politician who decided to strut himself on the Al-Aqsa compound against the wishes of the religious practitioners there. So this is a huge deal. And I want to ask everybody watching this, how many people knew that? How many people knew that this site was the reason there was the Second Intifada? It was a direct response to the desecration of Al-Aqsa by Ariel Sharon. And by the way, this will become clearer and clearer. All these genocidal Zionists are using Al-Aqsa as a political, weapon to gather the crazies around them and to get themselves elected. That's what this is about.
And in 2021, when Israeli forces stormed Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan, it all spiraled and led to an 11-day Israeli war on Gaza.
All right, I want to make sure everybody got that. The footage you're looking at is not Gaza 2024, it's Gaza 2021. And in 2021, after another desecration of Al-Aqsa, which we've, I think, made completely clear is sacred ground to the Muslim faith, there was an uprising. And how did the genocidal Zionists respond to it? They bombed Gaza for 11 days. How many, and I'll confess, I didn't know myself until I did the research, how many people knew that just 3 years ago, this same sequence of events, a deliberate desecration and provocation of one of the most sacred sites in Islam, was followed by a understandable response. You provoke somebody and they're likely to respond. And then that response was responded to with 11 days of bombing of a very densely populated area. The genocidal Zionists and their supporters go on and on about October 7th. And indeed, it was a military operation and it resulted in the death of civilians. And it is a wrong thing. All right. How does that compare to 11 days? All right. And how does it compare to the going on 120 days? But none of this is mentioned. But the point I want to make is this they have used, the genocidal Zionists have used the Al-Aqsa compound as a way to provoke devout Muslims and Palestinians, and then when they respond, then they use that to escalate to inconceivable levels, and that's precisely what happened. Again, we haven't even gotten to the provocations that occurred right before October 7th. We're going to get there, but again, it takes a minute to tell this story. But my question is, why haven't you been told this story yet? Now, the Al Jazeera documentary is 2 years old, and we're taking just small bits and pieces of it to give you the background before we get to the real story.
It is a slow, piecemeal process that the international community generally tolerates. The Israeli governments haven't faced any real costs or repercussions for those actions. And so it's that impunity that allows them to kind of keep pushing the envelope further each time.
Now we're going to go beyond the somewhat sanitized version of events presented by Al Jazeera. And we're going to show what the government violence against the worshipers at Al-Aqsa looks like. The day after this particular assault, the women of Jerusalem and the West Bank came out to show their solidarity and their intention to protect this holy ground.
مسجد الأقصى ده مسجد إلنا إن مسجد إلنا إحنا وهذا لازم كنا نرابط فيه وهذا المسجد المهدد يعني مش لازم كنا نتواجد فيه.
If the Muslim women had any illusions that they'd be allowed to attend the mosque and not be harassed by the Israeli police, well, here's what they got, and here's what they continue to get right up to the present day.
Israel has signaled a desire to de-escalate tensions, but with an accompanying warning.
We are working to calm things on Temple Mount and throughout Israel. At the same time, we are prepared for any scenario.
But its assurances appear to contradict footage of the attacks at the entrance of the mosque and the explosions inside. By early afternoon, the situation had returned to normal. But normal is an Israeli occupation that dates back to 1967.
I think it's pretty clear the harassment of Muslim worshipers at one of their most sacred sites, not just in Jerusalem, but on earth, is ongoing. And note the date of the next episode.
When we arrived at the gates, they didn't let us in. They said only people 40 years and older can enter. They began to throw stun grenades while we were standing, not doing anything. We came only to pray in Al-Aqsa Mosque. We are coming from far away. It's a shame. This is our Al-Aqsa. We need to pray in it. They are forbidding us from entering. What do we do?
I think what we see today is a very serious provocation, and it will definitely lead to an escalation, and maybe this is exactly what this Israeli government wants.
The ultra-nationalist Jews are carrying out incursions into the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex in occupied East Jerusalem. Big crowds of mostly young settlers raised provocative slogans and entered the mosque compound for a third day on Tuesday to mark a season of Jewish holidays. They're being escorted by the Israeli police. Israeli forces have set up military checkpoints in the old city and imposed restrictions on Palestinian worshippers.
Okay, there's been a little sleight of hand with language that I want to point out right now. One newscaster, and it was from Al Jazeera, actually, both times it was from an Al Jazeera person, they called the Muslim worshippers Israeli Arabs. Okay, the next time on another Al Jazeera clip, they called them Palestinians. Okay, that may be technically true. These are Muslims, and they're not using the word Muslim because they're trying to deflect and disguise the fact that this is an atrocity. They are prohibiting people from practicing their religion at not just some random place, but one of the most sacred sites, not just in Jerusalem, not just in Palestine, but in the entire Muslim world. So Al Jazeera is playing a strange game here. They should be describing these people as Muslims. That's what they are. Note the date of the next episode. Now, to put this in context, this is happening on Al-Aqsa, the entrance to the mosque. And as we showed earlier in the film, for centuries, and this has been agreed to by rabbis and imams, it is a place of prayer for Muslims and a place for respectful visits from everybody else. And this is a tenet of Judaism that you're not to pray in Al-Aqsa. I mean, it's Judaism. It's not make-believe. It's what the religions has said for the last century after century. My estimate is this has been a Muslim holy site for at least 1,200 years. All right, so let's look at the date and let's look at how the genocidal Zionists pay a respectful visit to Al-Aqsa mosque and compound. All right, so what's next? They've desecrated this holy space. They've harassed the worshipers. They've committed acts of violence against the worshipers. What's the big plan here? Well, hold on to your hats.
All of this means talk of rebuilding the temple is no longer considered a fringe idea.
Today, there is a lobby in the Knesset of how many members of Knesset that are constantly speaking about Jewish rights to pray on the Temple Mount. There are members of Knesset that actually talk about the rebuilding of the Holy Temple. Do you understand that 20 years ago, these people wouldn't have been given a moment on prime time television in Israel to say these things? They would have been laughed out.
So, a few years ago, this was considered fringe?
Zealots, lunatics, peculiar. Today, it's mainstream.
All right, so what's behind this? So they're literally talking about destroying one of the most important shrine complexes, mosque shrine and mosque complexes in the Islamic world, a sacred place to nearly 2 billion, maybe over 2 billion. I don't know if anybody's really counted, around 2 billion people. And they're going to replace it with their genocidal Zionist Disneyland. How serious is this? All right, well, let's take a look at how serious this is, who's behind it, and what's really going on.
Thank you all. And of course, I want to especially welcome Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. Your presence here today is a testament to the importance of this occasion, not only for the Trump administration, but in a very personal way, for you. For you, each of you, for the pursuit of peace, and for President Trump himself. Thank you. Dear friends, what a glorious day. Remember this moment.
All right, I think you're following the story now. there is a religious site of extreme importance to the Muslim faith called Al-Aqsa. It is a shrine and it is a mosque. It is not just important to Palestinians, it is important to the 2 billion Muslims who live on earth. That includes the Indonesians, that includes the Pakistanis, that includes the Turks, that includes the Moroccans, that includes a whole bunch of West Africans and people throughout Europe, North America, and South America. And according to the religion of Judaism, it is not a place for Jews to pray. However, the genocidal Zionists, in an act of provocation and in an act to build their own political base, have made numerous desecrations and incursions on this sacred space, provoking responses from the local people. And every time the people respond to their provocations, they answer with just absolute over-the-top malice, murder, and mayhem. All right, now we're going to see what Shin Bet, this is Israel's own internal security agency, says about these provocations. This was text, so let me read the most important part of it, or recap the most important part of it for you. During Ramadan, which is high holy days for Muslims, the genocidal Zionists have declared that they may or may not allow Muslims to worship at one of the most sacred spots in their religion. And they haven't decided yet. They're going to make the people wait. Maybe they're going to let people go. Maybe they're not. They're probably going to ban young men under 40. They might also ban women. I mean, who knows? But they're holding the whole thing in suspension. And of course, we know that the genocidal Zionists have given the Hamas fighters in Gaza the deadline of the beginning of Ramadan they're holding off on I guess what they call the final solution, which is going to be the massacre of God knows how many civilians in southern Gaza. So Ramadan's coming up. It's going to be a big thing. Shin Bet, which is the Israeli internal security force, has said not a good idea to continue these provocations, but they don't run the government. The genocidal Zionists run the government, and this is the fuse that's going to be lit, and we'll see what happens. But I just want to bring this full circle. Why didn't you know this? Why didn't you know that Hamas called Al-Aqsa flood? That was the name of their military operation on October 7th. Why didn't you know that desecration of this compound, this religious compound, was the trigger point for the Second Intifada? Surely there is a Palestinian dimension to this, obviously, but there is also an Islamic and Muslim dimension to this, which is massive. Again, and I'm going to go out on this point. Other than the sites in Saudi Arabia, which are hard to get to, hard to get out of, difficult, and not easy to travel to. This is the most important holy site, and this is the equivalent of telling Roman Catholics, we may or may not let you come to Christmas Mass. It depends on our whim. Maybe American Catholics in St. Patrick's would go for that. These Muslim folks don't appear to be willing to go for that, and why should they? So we have a very big thing coming up very soon, the beginning of Ramadan. You are now informed in ways you have not been informed by the mainstream news media and even the so-called alternative news media. So this is Brass Check. Thank you for your support. Does take time, does take money to make these things, and we can't do it without your help. And to those that have been supporting us, thank you. You're getting news, I think that's obvious, you're not getting it anywhere else.
Brass Check TV, free to you, not free to us. We've got a server bill, we've got an email software bill, we've got a tech helper bill, and that happens every month. So to everybody that is supporting us financially, that's paying for their subscription in one way or another, we really appreciate it. If you're not, consider doing so. Everybody's got money for the newspaper and the cable bill and all that. Do you have money for media that's actually serving you? That's really the issue here. And when you help us, it allows us to get this information out to the world. So thanks to all our supporters, and if you're not a supporter already, please consider becoming one.